Welcome into Locked On Knicks. Alex Wolf here. Going to be getting into some more player previews today. The end of bench guys, Jericho Sims, Keita Bates-Diop, and Cameron Payne. Do they have a little more to offer than your average end of bench guy? Maybe. I'll get into it right now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks. And I wanted to remind you all that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in sights and sounds on YouTube. We appreciate you making us part of your daily routine. Make sure you hit that auto download function on your favorite podcast app or the notification bell on YouTube so you never miss an episode. I'm Alex Wolf. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site The Strick, which you can find at thestrick.land. And today I'll be breaking down the end of bench guys in our season previews. Started last week with the two-way guys. Got into them and, if they might be able to step up and contribute this year. Overall consensus was probably not. I don't really know that there's a hidden gem to that level on the two-way spots, but that's not the case for the end of bench guys. I actually do think there may be some hidden gems at the end of the Knicks bench here and guys that could potentially step up at some point during the season if injuries hit, if a guy needs to sit down for some reason for a couple games or two, whatever. I think I think the Knicks have done a really good job of building this thing out all the way to the end of the bench. Now, it should be noted, all the way at the end of the bench is not officially full yet. I'm not going to cover Chumo KK here. I did do an episode with Philip Rossman-Reich of the Locked On Magic podcast recently, where I talked about him. He's not on a guaranteed contract, so technically speaking, for all intents and purposes, the last roster spot that the Knicks have is still open, the 15th spot. And I think they're doing that intentionally because they also have not used their taxpayer mid-level exception yet, which is worth about $5 million, which they can offer. I believe it's just strictly a 2-year contract with that, 2 years at about $5 million a season. So we'll see. I think maybe they're trying to test the water and see how things look after training camp. Maybe if there's a surprise cut on some team or something that, is a guy that they want to offer that $5 million to. Maybe that's what their thought process is. I can't say for certain, but at the moment, they do have 14 roster spots filled that presumably should be filled throughout the whole season. Precious Achiuwa is kind of the last domino to fall there. But another guy that is in a similar category would be Jericho Sims, because obviously the backup center position is a whole thing for the Knicks right now. And Jericho Sims is a guy that potentially could fill some of those minutes. We've seen him all throughout his career kind of, I guess, defy what you would expect from a guy who was picked as late in the draft as he was, picked in with one of the last picks in the 2021 draft. Like most guys don't end up having long playing careers that get picked that late. And he has managed to carve a rollout for himself so far. He's going to turn 26 this season. It'll be his 4th season. Last year, he averaged 2 points and 3.3 rebounds per game, with 1.2 of those being offensive rebounds and one single foul, and 69.1% shooting. Weirdly, the lowest number of his career. He shot over 70% every other year prior to that. In 13 minutes per game, he played in 45 games and he started 11. So with Sims, I'm not gonna lie, I kind of have been out on him for the most part. I think I've had episodes, this very summer where I've been like, hey, let's maybe get serious about these end of bench spots. Like, let's get some guys that you could realistically see contributing if called upon, whatever. But I think maybe I've been selling Sims a little short. Um, and I'm willing to admit that. So I started, looking into the numbers a little bit, and, just because I was curious. I feel like my overall perception of Sims is that he's not a great rim protector. He's kind of switchy, which is helpful, in switch heavy schemes, but the Knicks don't run that. And so with how the Knicks play defense, I think that it's, led to him not being much of a positive out there. I will say I think that the times that I'm most influenced by this are the times when he's forced into starting, which I don't think are very productive outings for him because I don't think he's a starting caliber NBA player. But I do think there's a chance that maybe he's actually a backup caliber NBA player. And maybe I've been a little off, based off what I saw in these stats. So let's just get right into him. So last year, he had a minus 6.5 on off per basketball reference. So that's actually not fantastic. Obviously, that means that the team is 6.5 points worse with him on the floor than they are with him on the floor. Um, which is, or sorry, with him 6.5 points worse with him on the floor versus when he's off the floor, I should say. But that's actually right in the middle for his career. So his worst year was actually the season prior, the 2022 to 23 season. And his best year was actually his rookie year, by far. I think he was like a plus 10 or something like that in his rookie year. But I think we could sort of throw that number out because that season the Knicks were starting the worst five-man lineup in the NBA and playing at the most minutes in the NBA. So pretty much anyone that came off the bench looked really good by comparison. That Kemba Walker, Evan Fournier lineup just was not good. Did not it did not produce great results, and I think that kind of skewed all the bench data that year for the Knicks and made. I mean, they obviously had some great bench players that year, like Emmanuel Quickly was great that year, and so on and so forth. But I think the data got a little skewed by the fact that the starting lineup was so bad that it made everybody look so much better by default. But let's just try to get into a little more of the numbers than that. So going into the season, I think it's pretty safe to say that Sims is gonna be the third string center, and like, I, it's like I said, I've kind of questioned how good he is, and I think my biggest concern, anecdotally, was that he doesn't seem like a great rim protector, and seems good enough as a switchy guy. But the numbers from last year actually paint sort of a different picture. So I looked it up, and per NBA stats, where they give you, tracking data on where guys defended and what the percentages were when they defended guys and at those marks and whatever. Um, they actually paint a pretty good picture for him. Now, these are sometimes a little imperfect. It's kind of hard to say like exactly who the primary defender was on any given possession every time and stuff like that. So you see that sort of skews the individual defensive matchup metrics sometimes too. But I mean, hey, we'll just take from these what we can. So per NBA stats, inside of 6 feet, Sims held guys to 8.4% worse shooting than usual. So that means like when guys were shooting against him, they shot 8.4% worse than they typically would inside of 6 feet, which is pretty good. And then on twos in general, like just overall 2 point shots against Jericho Sims, they shot 1.7% worse overall. Then on the perimeter, players shot 5.2% better on shots from 15 point to the 3 point line. So that's included in that overall 2 pointers number. And then they shot 3.4% better on threes. So you might be like, well, that's not great. They're shooting better in certain areas. So is that an indictment on his defense? But for a center, I don't think it's unreasonable that a guy would shoot a little better on threes against the center than any other player because centers presumably are rushing out there to help or are on a bad switch. And it's just, not a great matchup. And those are the matchups you try to avoid. So I did just pull as a point of comparison Mitchell Robinson. Players shot 13.5% worse on twos versus Mitch last year overall and 9.9% better on threes. So if you kind of compare those to Sims's numbers, uh, Mitch actually did worse on the perimeter, according to NBA stats, and was allowing higher percentage from three on guys that he got switched onto, probably because the Knicks were having him play a little deeper in drop coverage, which is sort of Mitch's role there. But all in all, like Sims kind of held his own. He did pretty good as far as keeping guys deterred inside the 3 point line. I think he was pretty solid. So maybe will eat a little bit of crow on that. I kind of thought that he had some issues with defending inside the 3 point line and particularly around the rim, and the numbers seem to suggest he does a pretty solid job. So I think I guess we'll have to see. I think he's pretty solidly the third guy behind Precious at center right now. And hopefully the Knicks will look to go small some. We've talked about that a lot this offseason, potentially going small with like OG Anunoby at the 4-5 with Julius Randle out there, and then moving Mikal Bridges to the three, potentially throwing like Dante DiVincenzo out there, or possibly Josh Hart, with that unit, try to run with that a little bit. But if if the Knicks do end up needing to call on him, I maybe feel a little better now. I think the numbers suggest that he could be pretty good as a backup. I think the issue just becomes if you start throwing him out there with starters, I think he gets exposed a little more just because he's not quite that level of player. But again, for a guy who was picked with one of the last few picks in his draft, like he's had a pretty solid career so far. So, props to Jericho Sims, and we'll see what this year holds for him. But there's a new face that I think needs some talking about, and that's Keita Bates-Diop. So I'll talk about him in just a second here, and why he maybe could be a sleeper for some of the solution at the backup four that the Knicks have been looking for. But first, I got to let you know about our friends over at FanDuel. And you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Well, we have something a little different for you now. Through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. And if that's not enough, FanDuel also has something special for our listeners this weekend. Be sure to check out FanDuel's Profit Boost in the app and use it for FanDuel's Double Your Winnings for all of Sunday 9-8 pregame and moneyline bets. Profit Boost will be live starting Friday 9-6. View your account page now to learn all about your boost. And if you want to, use it, if you want to potentially make another bet, I'm looking at the Jets Monday Night Football opening night plus 3.5 against the Niners. Or if you want to just bet money line, bet the Jets to win plus 176. I think that's solid enough odds for me. I would probably make that bet and hope that, as a hopeful Jets fan, hopefully they're able to put it together enough that they can win this opening game and then start a really good campaign here. So visit fanduel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, and I'm back in to get into Keita Bates-Diop. He is 28 years old. He will be turning 29 this season, and he's entering his 7th NBA season. Last year, he averaged 3.7 points and 2.1 rebounds. He shot 43.4% from the field, 30.4% from three, and 76.2% from the free throw line. I'll be honest, I'm not the most familiar with KBD's game, but the more I look at him, the more I'm like, could he kind of be a little bit of a sleeper to eat some backup 4 minutes if the Knicks need someone there? He played 47. So last year, I should say, he played half his season or roughly half of his season with Phoenix, and then the other part with Brooklyn. I actually got more playing time with Phoenix and then didn't really do too much in Brooklyn. But he played 47% of his minutes at the four in Phoenix last year and 50% at the three. And then the remaining couple percent, he played a little bit at what they considered shooting guard, what they considered center, but very few minutes there, mostly at the four and the three last year in Phoenix, according to Basketball Reference. He's 6'8". He's pretty solidly built. I think, if you look at him, he looks pretty strong. His rebound percentage at its best was 12.7% in 2021 to 22 with San Antonio, and he averages around 10%. So I bring those up because I think that's an important number for anyone that hopes to be, in the position of a big with the Knicks. If you're going to be playing the four, I think that's Tibbs is going to want you to be getting rebounds and getting offensive rebounds in particular. We see Julius Randle get those all the time. I think it's a big part of the Knicks game plan, obviously. So he averages around 10% rebound percentage for his career. So I pulled up Julius's just out of curiosity, and Julius has actually never had a rebound percentage lower than 14.7% in his entire career. So that's already a couple points better than KBD's best number in his career. And Julius averages around 16%. So it seems like most of that number being lower for KBD comes from not getting offensive rebounds, which is sort of a staple for Knicks bigs. So maybe that's a little bit of a cause for concern, and that's something that he would have to sort of prove there. But I mean, if you watch him and you see some of the highlights, it seems like it's not like he's not physical, or anything like that. I wonder if it's just kind of been what his role has been on the floor, if he's been out there more as a spacer. If the Knicks sort of like what happened with Precious last year, if they can sort of give him a defined role and say, hey, you're gonna just kind of be a big, like we're gonna use your defensive prowess and leave you on the inside, try to generate some steals, whatever on defense, be big, get rebounds, box guys out. And then on offense, we want you looking for those offensive rebounds, trying to fly in, grab those, or just, box guys out or take advantage of the fact that Mitchell Robinson is such a force on the offensive glass and, clean up whatever he's not able to get to, whatever. Maybe there's something there. But I think he had it was kind of weird seeing that he didn't play a ton last year because he had a really solid season in San Antonio in 22 to 23. Um, so especially once he made it to Brooklyn last year, a team that was not really playing for much, it was kind of weird to see that he didn't get a lot of time, but maybe it was actually because he was behind Mikal Bridges. Maybe it was also just, then we saw the Nets traded Bridges to the Knicks this offseason, and they've been, kind of still, I think to this day, involved in potential trade talks, trying to move some of their guys. So they might have just not seen KBD as a guy that they wanted to pump the value up on. So they didn't play him much as a result. But when he was in San Antonio in 2022-23, he averaged 9.7 points, 3.7 rebounds, 1 stock per game, and 1.5 assists per game in about 22 minutes. He also shot a career high 39.4% from three that year, which definitely seems to be an outlier. He's at 33.3% for his career. And that 33.3% is pretty well buoyed by that 34% that one year because he just didn't really have or doesn't really have many years in his career where he's been tasked with shooting that many threes. It's usually like under half an attempt per game over the course of most years of his career. Last year, I think with Phoenix, he shot like one per game, but then less than one per game once he went to Brooklyn. So maybe it's just kind of one of those things where he needs chances from three to be able to shine there. But if he could be a 39% 3-point shooter and provide good defense and prove himself as a rebounder, maybe the Knicks actually don't have a problem at the backup four here. Maybe we've been sort of down or overstating it a little bit. I know that Josh Hart is going to step into that role sometimes. OG Anunoby should hopefully step into that role sometimes. But maybe the Knicks would then be able to play like Precious and KBD or something, and then have Josh Hart out there, as like the three who still gets tons of rebounds but can kind of handle the ball a little bit, especially if KBD can shoot. That's a huge game changer. But I'm not going to necessarily bank on that, but that was only 2 seasons ago that he did that and shot almost 40% from three. So maybe it's something worth exploring. But if you watch tape, like I definitely think he seems to play big. I think his rep coming into the league was as a solid defensive player. So maybe this guy's a prime Tibbs reclamation project, especially since Tibbs was the guy who drafted him in 2018. So I guess we'll see if that's something that the Knicks end up deciding to go with. I think it's telling that they haven't really, like, they didn't just like outright cut him or anything. They seem to be keeping him on the roster. It seems like he's going to make it to the regular season. I would imagine he was probably a guy that they negotiated for in that Bridges deal to say, hey, if we're going to be giving you guys these many picks and whatever, we need like a little extra insurance. We like this guy. Maybe Tibbs is still a big fan or whatever. So we'll see. But I think that he has potential. It's just going to be a matter of, if the Knicks decide to utilize him or not. And obviously it's, he's not exactly super young anymore. Again, he's going to be 29 this season, so should be solidly in his prime right now. So this might be like the best version of him we'll ever see. I guess we'll just see if he ends up getting a chance to prove that or not. But speaking of that, there's another guy who's, I would say, pretty solidly in his prime that the Knicks added as a veteran minimum. That's Cameron Payne, who's going to be coming to the Knicks this season, and maybe has a role, maybe doesn't. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. So I'll talk about that in just a moment. All right, and I'm back in to talk about Cameron Payne now. So Cam Payne, 30 years old. He's going to be entering his 10th NBA season this year, which is kind of crazy because I remember he was kind of like just one of those perpetually young guys for so long. I still think of him as like, I feel like he still should be like 26 years old or whatever. He averaged 7.4 points, 2.6 assists, and half a steal last year on 43.2% shooting overall, 39% from three, and 86.6% from the free throw line in Milwaukee and Philly last year. So I would say, first off, pretty obviously Knicks fans became pretty well acquainted with him, I think, in the first round series last year when he hit some pretty killer threes against the Knicks, and had some good play for the Sixers when they were shorthanded in that series against the Knicks. So, I think that you can safely say that he's a guy that can scale up into the playoffs. First off, he was a a big part of the Suns teams, that were really good for a few years there. With Mikal Bridges, who the Knicks now have, with Chris Paul, Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, all those guys. He was a pretty big part of those teams, and I think that he was pretty highly valued there and signed a decently rich, contract, a new free agent contract back in, I believe, 2020, or 2021, maybe it might have been 2021. But I remember like back then, and that was pre Brunson, thinking like, oh, this is a guy that maybe the Knicks could sign that could scale up to be a starting point guard and like kind of be their solution that they've needed for a long time. But obviously things have gone a little different for him in his career now. I do think it's really interesting because I think he's a pretty quality, perhaps even high quality NBA player. Definitely, I think is a casualty of the new apron rules, making it kind of hard for like the middle class in the NBA. Obviously, they're all millionaires, but I think we're seeing a lot of guys like Campaign is one of them. I think the biggest one this offseason was Gary Trent Jr. accepting a minimum contract from the Bucks. Like, there's a lot of guys that you would think should be getting, $5 to $10 million at least, that are accepting minimum deals to go to better teams because it's like, oh, do I take the money from like one of the like three worst teams in the league, or do I just take an opportunity to try to win? But there's less like mid-level exception money going around and stuff than there was previously because all the teams are so concerned about hitting these first and second aprons, and there's these rules that hard cap you at a certain dollar amount now if you like make a trade during the offseason or whatever. I mean, the Knicks ran into it literally with the Bridges trade where they had to kind of work that deal out to eventually be hard capped at the second apron. And so they'll probably be a first apron team this year. And then, they won't be able to hit the second apron because they're hard capped at it. And then we'll see, where next year and beyond takes them. But, um, I think that they got kind of a steal in Campaign as a result. His assist percentage for his career is bordered on elite at times. I would say probably was elite his last couple of years in Phoenix. He hit 30+% assist percentage in his last two seasons in Phoenix. And I think he was a pretty hugely critical bench piece for them in like 2021, 22, and 23. I don't think that's too arguable. The year that they went to the finals, and then the 2 years after that where they were still quite good. I think he played a pretty big part in that, and was a big part of keeping their bench unit as good as it was. And I so he's kind of an interesting player to try to break down because he drives quite a bit. Like I was looking, I'll get to it in a sec, but his field goal attempts at the rim are not high, or even anywhere inside the 3-point line, really. He doesn't do a ton of shooting, but he does appear to be pretty good at breaking down a defense. He was fourth on the Sixers last year in drives per game, was 6.4, and he did that in just under 20 minutes per game. And that was against their three top minute getting ball using starters in Tyrese Maxey, averaged like 12 drives per game. Joel Embiid averaged like 10 or something like that. Tobias Harris averaged like 8 or 9 or something along those lines. And then was Campaign at 6.4, but in 15 less minutes per game than those guys were playing. So, he comes down, he runs an offense, he gets things going, and he's going to drive in, and he might not try to finish there, but he's going to, at least draw the defense and maybe hit a trailing center, maybe kick it out to the perimeter, whatever the case may be. It seems like he is a big driver. But as I said, he doesn't really use that driving ability to actually shoot at the rim all that often, and he's not particularly efficient there either. So he shot 48.5% at the rim overall last year between Milwaukee and Philly, and only took 68 total attempts, and that's against 286 three-point attempts. So, you know, under a fifth of his, or I think roughly a fifth of his attempts were, or roughly a fifth of the amount of three-point attempts he took was what he took at the rim, which is not fantastic. I mean, I guess it is what it is, if that's a player that you want mostly on the perimeter. But I do think we see with like Jalen Brunson, or we saw with Emmanuel Quickly, like having a floater, or the ability to get all the way to the rim, draw contact, whatever, is kind of that like second level skill for a point guard, where it's like, can you drive? Yes. Okay, now can you finish? And that's sort of like the difference maker for a lot of guys. I think Campaign maybe doesn't fall in that second category where he can really finish a ton at the rim. Although in some of the years in Phoenix, he was a little better. It seems like maybe he was just typecast a little bit last season. But if we're going off most recent returns, then that's what we saw last year on two contending teams where he was playing presumably a similar role to what he could play at best on the Knicks. I think if he managed to carve out 20 minutes per game for himself on this particular Knicks team next year, that'll be kind of a minor miracle. And it would probably mean that someone else isn't playing as well or something, and that he takes over for. But on the topic of threes, so I was saying how many he took, 286 threes last year. He shot 36.5% on about 2 catch and shoot threes per game last year, which is not bad, but actually lower than his overall percentage because, as I said, he shot 39% from 3 last year. So actually his pull-up threes number was 43% on 1.3 pull-ups per game, which is what kind of bolstered that number. Now, it's kind of weird because typically guys will shoot worse on pull-ups and better on catch and shoot because it's better conditions when you're doing a catch and shoot. Your feet are set, presumably you're open from someone kicking it to you. You're able to really take your time, catch it, line it up and shoot it, and make a three. And we see guys like Jalen Brunson. You know, his is almost the inverse of this. I'm saying that just off the top of my head. I didn't pull the number, but his is, I think he shoots about 30, 35, 36% on his pull-up threes, but takes them on decent enough volume so teams respect him. But then he shoots like well into the 40s on catch and shoot threes, just doesn't take as many attempts from there. But he actually shoots better, when he's able to set his feet and really take his time with the shot. So it's interesting that Payne is sort of more of a rhythm player that relies on that more. So yeah, it's kind of interesting to try to figure out where he's going to fit with the Knicks this year. I think there is a world where he could be a really solid backup, like pure point guard to Jalen Brunson. But it would probably mean Deuce playing his way out of the rotation like Grimes did last year when he got usurped by Dante, which would not be great. I would love for Deuce to be as successful as possible this year because I love Deuce. Or Tibbs being comfortable moving to a 10-man rotation again. So I actually don't hate that idea. I think I've been kind of proposing that all summer. Like, I think the Knicks should go to a 10-man rotation. And especially if they're as good as we hope they can be, if they're like really blowing out a lot of teams, they should definitely entertain, expanding even further than that and, actually embracing garbage time and whatever to keep guys fresh as long as they can this year. And, I think his rep as like this crazy, high minute coach is a little overblown at this point. Like the Knicks did not have a single person inside. I think other than Brunson, there was not a single player inside the top 10 in minutes per game last year, and Brunson was only narrowly inside of it, or he might have even been just outside of the top 10. And Julius Randle was, close, but still outside, I think, of the top 15 minute players in the league last year. I haven't looked at that stat in a minute, but it's not what you think. It's not, I think that especially, Josh Hart having to play all 48 a number of times last year just out of necessity, thanks to injuries and stuff, made people think like, oh, there's same old Tibbs again. But he really doesn't play guys a ton of minutes, at this point. I think he understands, medical advice and, keeping guys at where they need to be. So all that is to say, if Payne can find some time in a 10-man rotation where he comes out there with Deuce and Dante DiVincenzo and Josh Hart and Precious Achiuwa, that could be a nice, way to do it. I think there's also maybe a chance that, they could include him and still run it similar to a 9-man where maybe they keep, OG out there or something and do like an OG at the 5, Josh at the 4, DiVincenzo, and then, Deuce and Payne or whatever. But I think there's room for him to potentially find a role here. And I think out of the 3 guys that I outlined on today's show, I think it's most likely that Payne ends up finding a role, just because of the fact that I think he's proven to be a pretty solid NBA player at this point. And it would be a little bizarre to not see him get at least some playing time this year, even though the Knicks did sign him on such a value contract. Now, maybe he just ends up being prime, insurance for if somebody gets hurt or whatever. So if Deuce gets hurt, he can step right in. If Brunson, God forbid, gets hurt, you would probably actually want to throw Payne out there at the starting point guard more so than Deuce McBride, I think, just for the ability to fully run an offense. So, maybe he's just like the ultimate insurance policy, but I think just the fact that he's such a good 3-point shooter, that he's shown that he can scale up in the playoffs, stuff like that. I think it's a pretty good bet that he'll end up having some sort of role with the Knicks this year. But at any rate, we'll see. We're getting closer and closer to the season. We got more player previews coming up. I know I am going to be doing the 2 rookies this week as well, and Gavin's got a couple great episodes for you as well. we're working a little separately at the moment because he's in the process of moving and then going on a trip. So he recorded a couple episodes ahead of time. But I'm going to try to bring on some good guests for some of these other previews. I think I've already got one lined up for a couple of the previews of the rookies later this week. So keep your eyes out for that. But till next time, thank you all for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace out, everybody.